My mom introduced my sister's boyfriend to the whole family as the son I always wanted. At the same dinner, she introduced me as the reliable one. Pays the bills. I cut my steak, said nothing. The next morning, I stopped being reliable, all 7 bills. Same day, by Thursday, mom texted, "Something's wrong with the electricity." I replied, "Call the son you always wanted. My name is Simon. I'm 34 years old. I'm a long-haul truck driver, and I need to tell you about a Sunday family dinner that ended with me sitting in a parking lot at 9:30 at night, rereading my mom's Instagram caption on my phone, and very quietly deciding to change my entire relationship to the word reliable. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me back up. I grew up in Terre Haute, Indiana. Not small in the charming sense, where everyone waves from front porches and brings casseroles when someone gets sick, but small in the sense that everyone knows everyone. Nobody actually helps anyone. And the primary local hobby is discussing other people's business over the fence while pretending to water the lawn. We lived in a beige split level on Delaney Street, the kind of house that looked exactly like the 7 houses on either side of it. 4 of us in that house. A family, technically. Dad, Walt, he spent his entire working life at a regional distribution warehouse and communicated with us primarily through 2 channels: silence at the dinner table and commentary during football games. His emotional range ran from nothing to "that's a penalty, ref." One time, on my 16th birthday, he wrote me a note. Not a card, a note. 4 lines on paper torn from a legal pad. I still have a photo of it on my phone, not for sentimental reasons, more as documentation that the event actually occurred. My dad wrote me a handwritten note. This is roughly the equivalent of a dormant volcano deciding to produce lava. You take a picture. Mom, Diane. Here's where the real story begins. Diane, in her 20s, had wanted to be a painter. She took classes, spent money she didn't have on art supplies, dreamed about going to Chicago. Instead, she married Walt at 23, had me at 25, had my sister Darla at 28, and transferred all her unrealized ambitions onto the walls of our house. Klimt above the couch, Degas above the kitchen hutch. Some unknown impressionist in the hallway she bought at an estate sale and insisted was very atmospheric. She loved art in that specific, almost feverish way that people love the thing they didn't get to become. With opinions, with authority, and with a very particular impatience toward anyone she deemed incapable of understanding. Sister, Darla, 3 years younger. If I was reliable, Darla was luminous. The gap between those 2 words in our family was approximately the gap between he functions and she lives. Darla sketched since age 7, starred in every school play, started a community college art program and dropped it, not my thing, then switched to English Lit and dropped that too. No explanation offered. Every pivot, every unfinished chapter, Diane received with patient warmth. Creative people can't be rushed into a box. The system isn't designed for that kind of mind. Meanwhile, I got my CDL at 21, passed every certification, got my hazmat endorsement, and started earning a paycheck. Mom said, "Well, that's very practical. Not exactly inspired, but practical." Now the specifics. I'll give you the smallest ones, because the smallest ones always cut deepest. When Darla turned 16, Diane ordered a custom fondant cake from a bakery downtown, invited 20 people to Carmine's, made an evening of it. When I turned 16, she bought a sheet cake from Kroger, set it on the kitchen table, and said, "You know it's a tight month, honey." I knew. I would keep knowing that for the next 5 years. When Darla won first place in the county art competition, Diane framed the piece and hung it above the living room television. It stayed there for 9 years. When I won the regional math competition my sophomore year, Diane said, "Great job, sweetheart," and went to put the kettle on. The trophy lived on my windowsill until I eventually threw it out when I moved. When Darla dropped out the second time, Diane said, "Creative people suffer in rigid systems. It's not failure, it's self-knowledge." When I told Mom I was saving to lease my own rig, she looked at me the way you look at someone who has said something slightly embarrassing in public. But the art thing has its own chapter. When I was 12 and Darla was 9, Diane decided both of her children would love art. She enrolled us in a painting class at a studio called Bright Lines, a small room above a dry cleaner smelling of linseed oil and turpentine, where the instructor, Mrs. Calloway, had a habit of saying, "Feel the color," with the tone of someone prescribing medication. Darla caught fire immediately. Second class in, something clicked. Visibly, almost audibly. Her hand moved like it knew where to go. Mrs. Calloway said she had a natural compositional instinct. Diane watched and glowed. I sat at my easel and painted an apple. The apple was troubled. Not in a metaphorical sense. It simply looked heavy and sad, closer in spirit to a potato that had survived something difficult. Mrs. Calloway came over, looked at it, and said quietly, "Simon has a different spatial orientation. That is the pedagogical equivalent of why are you here?" We went for 4 months. Darla made flowers and skies, and all of it looked like real art. I made round, sorrowful shapes that were supposed to be apples or cats depending on the assignment, and they all looked like each other. At month 5, I told Mom I wanted to quit, that I didn't like it, that the smell gave me headaches. Mom didn't yell, that would have been simpler. She just looked at me and said, "You know what worries me about you, Simon? You don't even try to see the beauty. It's everywhere, but you have to want to see it." I was 12. I didn't know what to say. I nodded and went to my room. But that sentence stayed with me for 22 years. Like a small splinter you can't quite reach, the kind that reminds you of itself at unexpected moments. Usually, when I've just done something practical and useful, and I hear her voice with the phrase, "not exactly inspired," what I understood later is that she didn't mean me harm. She genuinely believed teaching me to love art would make me better. She was projecting her unrealized dream onto me and sincerely couldn't understand why I wasn't accepting the gift. The problem is that a gift you didn't ask for and don't want isn't a gift. It's an obligation with a bow on it. At 21, I got my CDL and started driving. Local first, then regional, then interstate, and eventually I signed a contract doing long-haul runs. Now, I do the I-65 and I-70 corridors. Indianapolis to Chicago, sometimes Atlanta or Dallas. I spend a significant portion of my life in a truck cab with a thermos of coffee, a blanket on the passenger seat, and a playlist that makes no logical sense. It's all mine, which is the only logic I need. I rent a 1-bedroom apartment in Indianapolis with a big east-facing window that catches morning light at an angle that makes the brick building across the alley look almost golden for about 40 minutes a day. I've never mentioned this to my mother. On the windowsill lives a cactus named Colonel. Colonel has been alive for 6 years and has asked nothing of me except infrequent watering. Genuinely, the healthiest relationship in my life. And I mean that without irony. My best friend is Riggins. He runs a small auto repair shop and shows up at my place without texting, but always with something useful. Once with tools to fix a leaking faucet. Once with a 6-pack and a movie we both loved, without being able to explain why. Once, just with 4 hours of silence at exactly the time I needed. Exactly that. We can spend an entire afternoon barely speaking, and it never gets uncomfortable. Most people spend their whole lives chasing that and never find it. I still went home. Once a month, sometimes more. I brought groceries. I set up 7 automatic payments after Mom mentioned, almost offhandedly, that bills are a lot to keep track of. Electricity, gas, internet, cable, her phone plan, Dad's phone plan, renter's insurance. I said nothing about it, I just did it. I had the heating unit replaced one November, paid for a bathroom renovation, helped Dad navigate an online DMV renewal because he still treats the internet like it might bite him. None of this came with a press release. It was just what I did. The moment I understood something was structurally wrong happened about 3 years ago on Christmas. No blow up, just a small, ordinary moment I couldn't put back. We were at the table. Me, Mom, Dad, Darla. Mom was describing an art show she and Darla had attended. I said, casually, that I'd stopped at a rest area outside Louisville a few weeks earlier, and someone had done an enormous mural on the overpass wall. Striking work, industrial landscape in blues and grays, and it moved. Diane looked at me and said, "Simon, A mural at a highway rest stop isn't really the same category as gallery work. Calm, unmalicious, just hierarchy. Their art was real. Mine was decoration for people with nowhere to sit. Dad crunched a dinner roll and said, "Murals can be good." That was the warmest thing he said to me all night. I thanked him mentally and drove home. I told myself it was fine. She didn't mean anything by it. I was being too sensitive for a person who spends 30 hours a week alone in a truck cab and considers himself unsentimental. I was wrong. Darla brought Brennan home about a year ago. Brennan is an artist, not paints for fun, an artist in the sense that it is his identity and the first thing he tells you when you meet him. I'm an artist, with a pause after. The kind of pause that expects something to shift in your regard for him. Diane didn't just accept Brennan. She adopted him, metaphorically, but with such completeness that the distinction barely registers. She quoted his views on color theory like scripture. She drove him to openings and paid for both tickets. She hung one of his pieces in the living room, on the wall where the Klimt print had been for 15 years. Moving the Klimt was not a decor decision. It was a statement of faith. Now, about what Brennan actually makes. Officially, he practices somatic painting, the body as instrument, not brushes. Himself, Mom described this as revolutionary. Darla looked at him the way someone looks at a person they're so in love with that independent judgment temporarily goes offline. I thought, okay, unconventional, but sure. The fuller picture surfaced a month later. Riggins, who reads absolutely random things online between oil changes, sent me a link to an arts journal. There was a feature on provocative artists of the American Midwest. And there, between a performance artist from Columbus and a woman who painted with her own blood, was Brennan, discussing his Berlin series. Brennan paints with his intimate body part. I'm not editorializing. He has a series of works made using a specific part of his anatomy as the instrument. The pieces sell for $2,000 to $4,000 each. Critics describe them as a deconstruction of bourgeois shame. A New York gallery called him the most courageous voice of his generation. The market apparently agrees. I read the article twice, stared at my ceiling for 60 seconds, called Riggins. "You read it?" he asked. "Yeah. And? I'm thinking about which painting is currently on my mom's living room wall." He was quiet. "You think she knows?" "She absolutely does not know. And if I tell her, she'll say I'm being reductive about art. That would be fair, from her perspective. Completely. A beat? Beer," he said. The February dinner. A regular Sunday, Diane made roast chicken and mashed potatoes. Dad at his end of the table. Me across from the window. Darla next to Brennan, who wore a linen shirt with rolled sleeves, and the ease of someone who considers himself slightly above the occasion, but has decided to attend. He was describing a new series. Diane listened with her head tilted, eyes focused, the expression of a person receiving something important. Dad buttered a roll. Darla watched Brennan the way people watch things they have decided are precious. I was thinking about the article. Looking at Mom's face, she genuinely doesn't know. She's listening to a man discuss his artistic practice and has no idea that the critical vocabulary around his most celebrated work would end this dinner on the spot. Then Diane picked up her water glass and said, "I want to say something." Everyone looked at her. "Brennan," she began, with the tone of a person who has been composing this, "I am so glad you came into our family. You're exactly what this house has been missing. Someone alive, someone real, someone with a genuine creative soul. You are the son I always wanted. Warm, sincere, not a trace of awareness that her biological son was sitting directly across from her, 34 years old and present." Everyone raised their glasses. Dad made an approving sound. For him, equivalent to a standing ovation. Darla beamed. Brennan lowered his eyes with the look of a man who is enjoying this more than he lets on. Then Diane looked at me. I waited. I sat there and actually waited. Maybe she would say something. Simon is our foundation. Simon keeps things running. Anything that registered my presence. She said, and Simon is our reliable one. You know, keeps the bills paid. Don't know what we'd do without him. She smiled, like she'd given me a gift. I picked up my knife and cut my steak. Small, methodical cuts, much smaller than necessary. just to give my hands something to do. I thought about 34 years of trying to be a person and not a service. I thought about 84 months of automatic payments. I thought about a heating contractor and a bathroom renovation and a 12-year-old boy who was told he didn't know how to see beauty. I said nothing. Finished the meal, hugged Mom in a way that was technically correct in every dimension. Got in my truck. In the parking lot, I opened my phone, pulled up Diane's Instagram post from 2.5 hours ago, before I'd arrived. A photo of Brennan's painting, taken at its best angle. Caption: "There is something so beautiful about having real art in your home. Some people are born with an artist's soul. Some people just aren't. And that's okay too. Everyone has their place." 463 likes, 16 comments. "Diane, you are so wise. What a treasure. You've always had the most beautiful eye. I called Riggins. You okay?" He answered. "I was introduced tonight as a utility company," I said. He was quiet one beat. "Come over. I have beer and no questions." That is the greatest sentence anyone has ever said to me. Any therapist on earth could build a program around those 7 words, and it would outperform everything else available. The next morning at 8 a.m., I opened my banking app and canceled all 7 automatic payments: electricity, gas, internet, cable, Mom's phone, Dad's phone, renter's insurance. I pressed each button without shaking, without internal debate. The app asked, "Are you sure?" each time. I said yes each time. I put the phone down, put the kettle on. But I need to come back to Brennan, because that thread isn't finished. About 10 days after the dinner, Diane called and suggested coffee, just to catch up. We sat at a place near her house. She talked about Brennan for 20 minutes, the new series, his brave approach, how it pushed against everything academic and stale. I listened. Then I said, "Mom, do you know specifically how he makes the Berlin pieces?" She gave me the smile I've known my whole life, the teacher re-explaining the obvious. "With his body, Simon. That's the entire concept of somatic painting. The body is the brush. A specific part of the body," I said. "If you want, I can show you the article." She waved it away with an actual physical gesture. "You're trying to discredit something you don't understand. You've always done this, Simon. When something is beyond your frame of reference, you make it smaller. I've noticed this pattern your whole life." I almost laughed. I am a man who drives a 40-ton vehicle through 4 states in any weather, solves mid-route logistics crises that would make other people cry. And apparently, I am the one who shrinks from what he doesn't understand. "Sure. I just thought you should know something true about the person you called your son," I said. "I don't need your commentary on art," she said. Page turned. I finished my coffee and left. Drove 6 hours to Chicago, thinking about how I'd tried to tell her the truth, and she decided it was my psychological limitation. Thought about the 12-year-old and the turpentine. Thought about the precise, unintentional irony of the whole thing. The man Diane chose as her cultural ideal is celebrated in New York for an act that would give Mrs. Calloway a heart attack. The irony isn't cruel, it's just accurate. I stopped calling first. If you've never been the person who always calls first, you don't know what it means to stop. It means pausing mid-automatic action, one you perform as naturally as breathing, and consciously not doing it. Harder than it sounds. First week, silence. No call, no text from their side. I ran 2 routes, watered Colonel, watched a documentary about Norwegian bridge construction, slept well. That alone felt suspicious. Second week, Darla texted, "Where have you been?" I replied, "Runs." She didn't write again. Third week, Diane called. Not to ask how I was, to say the bathroom faucet was leaking, and she didn't know who to call. I gave her a contractor's name and said they were good. She paused. "You usually would have just come and figured it out." "Yeah," I said. "I used to, Simon. Is something wrong?" "Everything's fine," I said, and hung up. Thursday, 4th week. She texted, "Something's wrong with the electricity. The lights went out yesterday, and half the outlets aren't working." I looked at the message, thought for 3 seconds, replied, "Call the son you always wanted." She didn't respond for 3 days. Then, "That was very hurtful, Simon." I thought about how many times something had hurt me and I hadn't texted anyone. I replied, I know, nothing else. Just those 2 words. Sometimes the most accurate thing is also the shortest. Parallel to all of this, and it's not a coincidence. Parallel to stopping the energy drain of performing membership in a family that wasn't performing it back, my work made a specific move. My boss, Sloan, has a gray beard trimmed to a point and keeps an unlit cigarette between his teeth. He quit smoking 7 years ago, but holds onto the prop like a character who hasn't fully departed. He doesn't say much, but when he does, he means it. He called me in after a difficult February run. I'd rerouted twice through a weather shutdown, lost 6 hours, delivered on time with no complaints. No other driver had taken the run. Too unpredictable, they said. Sloan sat across from me and said, Simon, you know what I like about you? You don't tell anyone what you did. You just do it. Then you come back and say, everything's fine. I didn't know what to say. Partly because it's true. Partly because nobody had ever said it like that before. He offered me a senior route coordinator position. Fewer driving days, more oversight, substantially higher pay, and an option to buy a stake in the company in 2 years. I'll think about it, I said. Think fast, he said. Good people get poached. I accepted the next day. Around that time, I finally called a therapist. Not because I was in crisis, just because certain thoughts land better in the presence of someone who knows where to put them. Found her through a colleague's referral. Her name is Dr. Adler. She has 2 things I fixate on during sessions. A wooden owl clock on the wall behind her, handmade looking, slightly lopsided, and a coffee mug that reads, I'm listening, but I'm making no promises. That combination sets me right immediately. A person with that mug does not traffic in platitudes. 3rd session, she said something I came back to for weeks. Simon, you're not grieving your family. You're grieving the family you wanted that never existed in the form you needed. I looked at the owl for a long time. Those are different things, I said. Fundamentally, she said. The first is the loss of something real, painful but legible. The second is grief for an illusion. And grief for an illusion is much harder to process because you can't point to the moment it broke. It didn't break. It simply was never what you were waiting for, and you waited anyway. For years, I pulled over on a side street after that session and just sat for a while. Not crying, just sitting. If you think that sounds sentimental, try spending 34 years assuming people are simply turned away from you. They'll understand they were never turned toward you in the way you needed. That's a different kind of loss. That's grief for something that was never there. Riggins called that same evening. Asked if I wanted to go to a demolition derby the following weekend. I said yes. We went. It was extremely loud and smelled like burning rubber and exhaust. And I sat in the bleachers thinking that this noise, this mechanical spectacle, was beautiful to me in a way no gallery print ever managed to be. Just a different kind of beautiful. The kind I actually have access to. My neighbor Ruth is a woman in her late 60s who keeps 2 cats and bakes something on Sunday afternoons that fills the whole floor with warm vanilla. One evening, I came home to find my kitchen sink backed up and flooded. I said something loud and undignified. Ruth opened her door and said, "Heard that? What do you need?" Not, "Oh, how terrible." Just, "What do you need?" We cleaned for 2 hours and ate reheated soup at 11:30 at night. This is what presence actually looks like. Simple. No performance. No expectation of anything in return. Diane called on a Wednesday evening. I knew before I answered. There's a tone, slightly warmer than usual, more preamble, softer vowels. "How are you, Simon?" "Staying warm out there on the road." "I've been thinking about you." I kept my answers short. Waited. "Simon, we have a situation. Your dad needs some cardiac tests. You know how he is about doctors. But I pushed him, and the out-of-pocket is going to be around $3,000. I was thinking maybe you could..." The old version of me had already said yes before she finished the sentence. "Mom, I can't do that right now. I've got my own expenses this month." A pause. Long. "But you always..." "Right now, I'm not." "Simon, are you upset?" What I said was meant as a compliment. You know how much I love you. I thought about the word compliment, the word love. I thought about how both can mean everything and nothing simultaneously depending on what comes after them. I know, Mom, I said. But right now, no. I hung up, texted Riggins. She called. He replied, called it. Friday? Beer? I replied. Definitely. I showed up on a Saturday morning without calling ahead. Diane was in the kitchen. Dad was watching pregame. Darla was gone. She'd left with Brennan to an opening somewhere. Which series he was showing, I didn't ask. We sat at the kitchen table. Mom put the kettle on. Her way of making the conversation feel like just a conversation. I let her have that, Mom, I said, even. I want to talk about one specific thing. Not argue, just say it out loud. She nodded. Carefully. At the February dinner, you introduced Brennan as the son you always wanted. You introduced me as the person who pays the bills. She opened her mouth. Wait, I said quietly. I'm not finished. She closed it. I've been paying your electricity automatically for 72 consecutive months. I replaced your heating unit in November 2022. I brought groceries on major holidays 6 times in the last 4 years. I sent money for 2 home repairs. I helped Dad with his DMV renewal online. I wasn't keeping score. I just did it because that's what you do for family, because that's who I am. And when you needed a word for what I was in this family, you chose "you're reliable." Like a utility, like a service. Diane was looking at the table. There's another thing, I continued. You tried to teach me to love art. I couldn't get there. Not because I'm obtuse, but because I have a different kind of perception. I see beauty in how a route plan comes together perfectly, in how an engine runs clean after the right repair, in how a logistics problem resolves on time. That's also beauty. It just doesn't come with a frame. She raised her eyes. They were wet. But instead of seeing that, I said, you decided I wasn't refined enough. And the man you chose as your son, the man I tried to tell you something true about, and you called it my limitation, that man is not an ideal. He's just different. I didn't want to embarrass her with Brennan specifically. I just wanted her to understand that what she chose over me isn't a standard. It's a preference. And preferences say something. Dad walked in from the living room. He poured coffee, sat down at the table without being asked. For Walt, this is equivalent of an emotional keynote. He said, "You're a good driver, Simon. I tell people, my son drives long haul and never complains about the road." I looked at him. "Thanks, Dad," I said, and meant it. Every word, without irony. Mom was quiet for a long time. Then she said softly, "Simon, I didn't know you felt it like that." "I know," I said. "That's the whole thing." Darla called a week later. Not to defend Mom, just to say, you were right. I'm sorry I stayed quiet for so long. Honesty without theater is rare in my family, and I recognized it when I heard it. Brennan and Darla broke up 2 months later. Mom still has his painting on the wall. I still don't know which series it's from. I've accepted that some information is simply not mine to have. Mom and I talk now, differently. Sloan gave me a second raise in September. Colonel sits on the windowsill and registers none of it. Ideal witness. My name is Simon. I'm 34 years old. I drive long haul. I have a cactus, a friend who shows up without texting, and a therapist with an honest coffee mug. I no longer wait to be seen by people who decided, quietly and without malice, not to look. The morning I canceled 7 payments, I did it without shaking. Kettle on. Maybe that's what a different life sounds like when it starts. Not dramatic, just quiet, just yours.